Hello, everybody, and thank you for pulling into the Palmetto Pitstop. My name is Adam. Tony, he isn't here today. He's up north back on his old stomping grounds. So it'll just be me taking you through a recap of the Bass Pro Shops Bristol night race. It wasn't much of a race, now was it? I mean, it was more of a game of follow the leader. Kyle Larson, hats off to him. Tony and I finally got a prediction right on this podcast. And it's not in the way that we probably would have wanted. Kyle Larson set the record for the most laps led in a Bristol race, and it wasn't even close. He was out front, swept the stages, and nobody from second on back could have done a thing about it. Towards the end there, Bubba Wallace started to show some speed, but at that point, it was Larson. The game was over. Well before the white flag or the checkered flag waved. The biggest issue that people have been running into, or people have been expressing with this race, and with short tracks in general in this new car, is that they just can't pass. Denny Hamlin, he's mentioned it several times on his podcast, that these cars just can't get around each other. I mean, if you make a spec car and you level the playing field, that makes everybody equal. And the biggest difference that we saw all night in these cars in terms of time, it was minuscule from between Kyle Larson, who looked like he was pulling away from everybody in this insane car. He was the only one who was able to break away, and he was still only about maybe 0.2 of a second faster than the rest of the pack. So it wasn't as though he was dominating. It's just that he was the only one able to get away from the pack. There are graphs there you see the average run time, or the average running position of the drivers in the final 50 laps. And things just could not look worse for this car on short tracks. The tires they brought in from the spring race that we saw, and it was a great race. We saw a lot of tire failures, a lot of tire wear, but it just didn't happen today. Or, excuse me, it didn't happen this weekend. And that really showed. And it showed in the worst possible way, because we got possibly the worst race of the next-gen car. There were a few drivers, of course, this being a playoff cutoff race, that they were running up front, namely Ty Gibbs and Martin Truex Jr., two Gibbs drivers. Of course, Martin Truex in the final year of his full-time NASCAR Cup Series career being eliminated, so he will remain just a one-time Cup Series champion. Obviously not something to sneeze at. It's a great accomplishment what he was able to do in his career, but he will not be the 2024 Cup Series champion. But a pair of mistakes like that ended up costing him the chance to move on. He was running up front. He was having the best race of the playoffs, but they got stuck in the back, and they spent the entire race trying to pass people, and it just wasn't happening. Ty Gibbs, his issues started shortly after the end of the first stage, with about, just under 400 laps to go, and he couldn't make up any of the time despite him running well before that. Similar with Martin Truex Jr. Once he's at the back, that was basically it. It was just a field position game, and NASCAR's always been a field position game, but at least in the past you were able to make some moves. Not so much the case here on Saturday night. But not just a story of negatives, as Christopher Bell, finally, we get to see the guy who has made the Final Four as many times as he has finally show up. A top 5 finish, racing in the regular season. Tony and I were talking about how he was way too inconsistent. 8 finishes outside the top 30 despite his wins and his playoff berth. Excuse me. He did look really good on Saturday, getting that top 5 and being able to move on without any issues. Harrison Burton, unfortunately, I hate to say, but everybody's pick to be the first guy eliminated, or one of the first drivers eliminated from the chase, had to go out of the race with engine issues or car troubles, and that ended his night, that ended his playoff run. Still an incredible race at Daytona with a feel-good story there, but not what Harrison Burton wanted. Of course, he was hoping to move on, but couldn't make it happen. And once he was behind the wall, that was the end of his run. Joey Logano caught up in a bit of a crash, but that didn't matter as he won the opening race at Atlanta. So he could brush it off and just move on to Kansas next week. Denny Hamlin. The talk of the town was Denny Hamlin's strategy in Atlanta, saying he just wanted this amount of points. He wanted 20 points, and he was riding at the back all day. He has said that his car was not able to pass. He just did not have the car, and he had 3 or 4 crashes at Watkins Glen, and it looked like he was really in trouble heading into Bristol, obviously below the cut line, and being able to come out well above plus 15, but that's no surprise. Denny Hamlin is fantastic at Bristol. Won in the spring, even though the win didn't count towards the playoffs because of that whole issue with Toyota Racing Development. But it didn't matter. He didn't need to win today. He just needed to do well, and he needed some guys to fall back and make mistakes, and that's exactly what happened. Ty Gibbs, Martin Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski, and Harrison Burton, all the odd men out. They are the first 4 out of the 2024 playoffs. And finally, the playoffs can start for Denny Hamlin. It seemed like he was just on cruise control until Bristol. Of course, he had that strategy. Just wanted to avoid trouble at Atlanta, and he gets caught up in it anyway on the last lap. Gets caught up on the first lap with that crash with Corey LaJoie and Kyle Busch. So he had to go in and attack at Bristol. He was full offense, and he's vintage Denny Hamlin on a short track. He's great when it counts, despite the mantra of him being a playoff choker. He clutched up when he needed to, and he is moving on to the round of 12. Well, the results after the cut, of course, we have the 4 drivers eliminated, but we now have the official rankings as the playoff ranks are reset for the round of 12. Kyle Larson, who showed he showed some speed at Atlanta, of course, up towards the top, but then getting in that really strange crash along with Chase Briscoe early on that may have put Briscoe in a worrisome spot, but Kyle Larson, of course, is Kyle Larson. We expected him to come out and win this race, and he did so in vintage Kyle Larson way, and he did not pull a checkers or wreckers. It was checkers, and it was Kyle Larson the whole way, sweeping the stages and basically leading it almost start to finish. So Kyle Larson being the leader, moving into the round of 12, no surprise. Christopher Bell, we mentioned that he was way too inconsistent in the regular season, but the playoffs, it's when these guys know that they have to show up each and every week, and that's exactly what Christopher Bell has done. And with that good finish, he is now the second spot and moving into this next round. Tyler Reddick, the regular season champion, not performing as well as he maybe wanted. Obviously, the regular season champion winning over Kyle Larson, those 15 bonus points per round really coming in handy. But he just hasn't been there at the end of these things. I mean, we saw him finishing second almost every week before he was able to finally get it done at Michigan and win his second race of the season. But we haven't seen him this playoffs. We haven't seen him in the playoffs. Not at Atlanta, not at Watkins Glen, and not at Bristol. It's been very quiet for the regular season champion, but if he can reset along with these standings, he should be just fine. He won at Talladega in the spring. Of course, Talladega is a matter of surviving, not so much a track like Bristol, where if you get in front, you can lead, not a track like Kansas next week, where you expect some of these guys to go out and dominate, or to just compete when we have had such great battles to the finish in these last few years. But we'll get to that at Kansas. But Tyler Reddick, maybe not having the playoff run that he wanted thus far, but he's still in third. He has time and he has a buffer, but he has to get going. He needs to get that seat hot again, because when he was on fire, he was the best driver out there, and he just has to settle back in and get going. Fourth place, William Byron has very much gone silent this season. After those first 8 races, he has been quiet. And oddly enough, it seems like outside of Larson, Hendrick has been mostly quiet. You have 1 win with Chase Elliott, 1 win with Alex Bowman, of course. William Byron, 3 wins in those first few races of the season. But William Byron, I think he's lucky to be in this position, this fourth place, because you haven't heard his name as much. And I think with these racetracks coming up, William Byron's still obviously a very talented driver, but he needs to get himself locked back in like he was in the playoffs last year to make it to the final round. He hasn't been the guy he was in 2023, at least not since after his first few wins of the season. He's, of course, had good finishes, but he has not been competing for wins. I believe the last time he really was up there competing for a win was Michigan, and that race probably shouldn't have been available for him to win, assuming that caution for Martin Truex Jr. doesn't come out towards the end of the race. So, William Byron, I think if you're them, you're happy to have this fourth place. Excuse me. You're happy to have this fourth place positioning going into this round, but you got to get going. Ryan Blaney, defending series champion, and my pick for the championship this year. Denny Hamlin, of course, like I just mentioned, he's good. A lot of people hate him, but you can't deny he is a fantastic race car driver, a NASCAR legend at this point. You just expect him every week to compete, and he's going from Bristol, which is a track he's won at, to Kansas, where he's the winningest driver. He is here, folks, unfortunately, for those who don't like him. Denny Hamlin in 6th, going into Bristol when he was below the cut line and coming out in great shape and in great position to keep moving on in the playoffs. He just has to maybe get a bit of luck on his side. Obviously, anything can happen at Talladega, but you have tracks like Kansas and maybe the Roval. Denny Hamlin's not fantastic at road courses, but he has had good finishes and wins at them. So if he can get it done at Kansas, he doesn't have to worry about surviving Talladega or the Roval. Like I said, he clutched up when it mattered. And now moving on to 7th place, Chase Elliott. Again, quiet but consistent. Chase Elliott, even when he's not winning races, he is one of the best and most consistent drivers in the field. He seems to always be there, up in the top 10, the top 5, having a great average finish throughout the year. Chase Elliott, even though he's in 7th, I don't think he has anything to worry about. I think he can outlast these guys, but he does have to worry about Talladega. All of these drivers are going to have to worry about Talladega, but he's won at the Roval. He's good at those road courses, so if he wins the Roval, he has nothing to worry about. And of course, with any of these guys, you win a race, your problems go away, the stress is lifted for a few races. But I think Chase Elliott, his races have been consistent, his finishes have been consistent. But a win would do a lot for him. He hasn't won since Texas, and before that, it's been a bit of a drought for him before that win at Texas. So, if you get another win now in the playoffs, that will lock you into the next round. I think that kind of gets Hendrick going. Maybe Larson's win at Bristol maybe ignited something in the Hendrick guys. Maybe this will help them along the way. Maybe they'll take a few wins now in this round. We expected Hendrick to make noise. You have all 4 of your drivers make the playoffs. You expect a few of them to really be going off, but hasn't been the case thus far. Only Kyle Larson, who had a bad first 2 races. So you gotta hope one of these guys, other than Larson, is gonna step up. And finally, Joey Logano, who I owe an apology to for saying he would be out in the first round. He won Atlanta. He has Kansas, where he's won before, but not in this next-gen car. Talladega, where he has super speedway wins. And, of course, the Roval coming up. So, Joey Logano, he's sliced bread. He's a 2-time series champion. He's ran this gauntlet before in this format twice. So, no reason to believe that you can count him out at this point, even though I counted him out. But, don't mention that. Now, as we get past the top 8 drivers in the playoffs and the before the cut, now at the cut line or below the cut line, we have Austin Cindric, who has been great in this first round of the playoffs. I think this positioning of being 4 points below the cut line in ninth doesn't do it justice. Good race at Atlanta, along with the rest of the Penske guys. Survived Watkins Glen, a very important thing to survive Watkins Glen when it seemed like every single Chase driver was having an issue. Austin Cindric was able to stay above water. Daniel Suarez was really riding off of a good Atlanta, and this points position of 10th kind of affirms that, because he had an okay finish at Watkins Glen, but Bristol was an absolute nightmare for Daniel Suarez. Just for coming home 31st, could not go anywhere, was fighting for his life over these guys, trying to keep his head above water. Daniel Suarez had to have gotten out of that car and just taken the biggest sigh, or given the biggest sigh, because that race must have been absolute hell towards the back. And in 31st, a finishing position being just enough to get him into the next round. He might be able to do something at Talladega, but he needs to work on these speedway finishes. Kansas is going to have to be his good friend here, because otherwise that could be the end of his playoff run if he doesn't figure things out. I think one of the biggest surprises of this playoffs has been Alex Bowman. Alex Bowman, of course, coming in on a rumored hot seat. Some people thinking that he would be moving on from Hendrick, or rather Hendrick moving on from him. He gets upset at that, and then he goes out and scores an insane amount of points through 2 races and manages, of course, to move on with that performance. Him, of course, winning the Chicago Street Race earlier this year in July. He's 7 points below the cut line in 11th. I thought that was a bit surprising. Alex Bowman, one of those Hendrick guys that I think if they can just get a win, they're gonna... That team, I guess, outside of Larson, he's been the only one really, really winning in the second half of the season. So if Larson's win, maybe it ignites something in them. But I think one of these other 3 Hendrick guys needs something to go their way and get into victory lane to maybe get these other guys going. Because otherwise, you're looking at Alex Bowman, he could be out. A bad Talladega without a win could be the end of Byron and Elliott's run. So, finally, Chase Briscoe. I would like to toot my own horn on that one. Stewart-Haas Racing, this is their last push as a team. As we know, their team is selling off charters. Stewart-Haas leaving the sport, becoming the Haas factory team in 2025. And after that crash at Atlanta, I thought it was over for Briscoe. I thought there was no way he'd recover, but he gets good. He survives. Watkins Glen with a good finish when everyone else is struggling. He has a top 10 in Bristol, again, when a lot of these guys below the cut line are struggling. So I'm really glad that Stewart-Haas, growing up a Tony Stewart fan, I'm glad to see that this team is able to do one last great push, and I hope they're giving him every available resource to keep him going, because we saw Briscoe make it deep in 2022. So the talent is there, and before he goes to the 19 car next year at Joe Gibbs to replace Martin Truex Jr., it would be great to see him make one final deep run for Stewart-Haas. But like I mentioned, Ty Gibbs, Martin Truex Jr., Keselowski, and Harrison Burton, the ones eliminated. Ty Gibbs, I believe, Ty Gibbs and Keselowski, I think, are surprising that they were out in the first round. I thought Ty Gibbs was just so consistent throughout the season. I know he hasn't won yet, but the pieces are there for a great driver and a great career. So seeing him go out was shocking. Keselowski always seemed to be doing well, but it just obviously wasn't enough this year to get him onto the round of 12. He's bumped out. Martin Truex, Tony and I both had him out first round, as well as Harrison Burton. I don't know what's going on with that 19 team, but nothing is going their way. Of course, racing really well at Bristol would have survived, but that speeding penalty ended up being the dagger in their championship hopes. But as we take a break and take a step away from Bristol, the night race that wasn't, and we look ahead to a race that will be, or at least we hope it will be, Kansas. There has not been a better track for this next-gen car than Kansas. It had the closest finish in NASCAR history in the spring when Kyle Larson, obviously now fresh off his Bristol win, but Kyle Larson edging out Chris Buescher for the win in the spring by 1/1000th of a second as it registered. That being, of course, the race that kept Buescher out of the playoffs. And now that he won Watkins Glen, he would have been in this round of the playoffs. So maybe a little heartbreaking for Buescher fans out there, and Buescher himself, of course. But Kansas is something to look forward to, and I think it is what we need to cleanse the palate of Bristol, because Bristol, everyone talking about it is just going to say negative things. It's going to be they can't pass. It's not a good track, not a good track, but it's not a good track for this next-gen car. Maybe it's time to either rebuild it or get rid of it or whatever. Kansas and these intermediate speedways, this is where this car shines. Kansas is going to look good as long as I can remember. Or, excuse me, I shouldn't say as long as I remember. As long as this next-gen car has been a thing, Kansas has produced fantastic racing. The spring was a great race. Last year's races were great. You had Kurt Busch's final career win. You had Bubba Wallace taking over for Kurt Busch's car and his team in the playoffs in 2022 and getting a win on the intermediate. You had Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson, what seemed to really be the birth of their rivalry, the true birth of their rivalry in the spring race of 2023, where he moved him out of the way for the win. And that could lead for that again, because you have Kyle Larson. He just won after having a bad start in the first two races. And Denny Hamlin, who also had a bad start in the first two races. These guys, obviously moving on with championships on the line. And you have a crapshoot of Talladega on the horizon looming over you. A win at Kansas could do great, and they both have won there before, and who knows what people are willing to do for a championship. We've seen what people are willing to do to advance in this style of playoffs. So, Hamlin, Logano, a guy to watch, one of the winningest drivers, winningest active drivers, Hamlin, Logano, and Kyle Larson. Larson being the only driver not in a Toyota to win at Kansas in this next-gen car. Otherwise, it's been dominated by Hamlin in 2311. Of course, I said Kurt Busch, Bubba Wallace, Denny Hamlin, and Tyler Reddick before this spring when Kyle Larson edged out Chris Buescher. And I think a lot of these guys could end up making some moves. I think Kansas could be a lot more competitive, and Kansas is already competitive. I don't want to get that wrong. But I think Kansas could end up being a really, really competitive race, even though it is the first round of the playoffs, or the first race of this round, excuse me. I think drivers are going to be pushing it because they know Talladega is anybody's game. Anyone could win Talladega if you survive. I mean, we saw what happened at Daytona. Harrison Burton just managed to be one of a handful of drivers without damage throughout that entire race, and he ends up winning his way into the playoffs in his last year at the Wood Brothers. And we saw Talladega in the spring, of course, with Michael McDowell leading through the tri-oval and spinning out with Keselowski there and Tyler Reddick stealing the win. You just have to be in the right place at the right time, and being in the wrong place at the wrong time obviously will put a huge gash in your playoff hopes. So a lot of these drivers could end up wanting to put their eggs in the Kansas basket. Maybe feel they have more control of their destiny if they can win at Kansas than if they have to rely on good performances at Talladega or the Roval. Like I mentioned earlier, Hendrick, anybody not named Larson, they could pick up good finishes here. Bowman, Elliott, Byron, these guys are good at this track. So if they can just push good at this track to winning at this track, that will be huge for them, moving them on past Talladega and the Roval. Of course, the Roval not much of an issue for Chase Elliott, who has won there before, but not at the current configuration. So we can see some guys trying to really push it, and I think Tyler Reddick could be one of them as well. Tyler Reddick won here in the fall last year, we saw, and he could do it again. I think he knows that he did not have the strongest first round, and I think he wants to get back to that. He wants to make noise. He doesn't want to just have a Martin Truex Jr. season like they had last year, where they made it in regular season champion and then just fell away in the playoffs. Very rarely heard their names, just survived until they were eventually eliminated. I think Tyler Reddick, now, still in the prime of his career, just entering the prime and looking fantastic at 23-11, looking like he'll be a lifer in that 45 car. If he can get a win at Kansas, again, don't have to worry about Talladega, don't have to worry about the Roval. But Tyler Reddick is good at those tracks too. He has won road courses. He has won Talladega. So he has a good chance of recapturing some momentum going into the later ends of this round. And now, on top of that, you have some guys who have been eliminated. Do they try to make a move at Kansas, who have done well here? Martin Truex Jr., I think, would be a great guy to keep an eye on. His championship run is over. Like I said, he will remain a one-time NASCAR Cup champion. It won't happen this year now that he's been eliminated, but he ran in the top 5 here in the spring, and I believe he finished third or fourth with that close finish in a tight run with Chase Elliott as well. So Martin Truex, if he has nothing to lose, why don't you try to put your guy and put your team into a position to win? So we could see him possibly upsetting the playoff drivers if he can get in the right place. Martin Truex Jr. could get the final win of his career. I'm sure, even though his playoffs are over, he wants one final win. He doesn't want last year to be the last of his career, the last winning season of his career. I'm sure he wants to get one more in these next few weeks, and it would be great to see him send out that 19 car with a victory. As for predictions, of course, I'm the only one here right now, so I can't compare with Tony. But I think for next week at Kansas, I think for this week at Kansas, I am going to have to stay with the Toyota dominance, and I think Tyler Reddick gets back on track. Like I said, I think he gets the win this weekend. I won't do the 3 drivers since it's just me. I don't want to, not as fun. But I think Tyler Reddick can get it done here. He can win. He's won here last year. He's won in this car. He's won with this team. He can do it. He can move on if he can just get his head straight again. I don't think he's mentally struggling. I think the luck just hasn't been in his favor, but Kansas is a track where your fate is basically in your own hands, and if he can get himself in good position here, even a top 5 would be great just to get momentum back, but he needs a win in the worst way, I believe. But of course, now that we have wrapped up our preview of Kansas, I would like to head now into our final turn. And without Tony here, there's no testing Tony, sadly. But we do have a recap of silly season, and I think that would be just what we need, because so much has happened this year that we need to get up to speed, because as we now enter, there's only 7 races left in the 2024 season. There's only 7 races left in the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season. So the offseason will be here before you know it. Martin Truex will retire. We're going to see a lot of new faces and a lot of new cars and a lot of new teams. So I think a good recap is in order. And we start with the biggest news of the season, of silly season, which is Stewart-Haas Racing selling 3 charters. Of course, Stewart leaving the sport and Haas becoming the Haas factory team. Front Row Motorsports was confirmed to have purchased one of those charters, and they will be fielding Todd Gilliland and Noah Gragson. Michael McDowell leaving Front Row to go to Spire in the 71 car, and now there will be 3 cars at Front Row Motorsports, with the third driver still to be announced. Trackhouse purchased a charter, which was expected with the early season rumors, and that being given to Shane Van Gisbergen. So we get to see him. He has been doing great in Xfinity, but now we get to see him full-time in the Cup Series. And at these road course races, it could be interesting to see how many wins he can steal away from some of these lifers in the Cup Series. To have a guy come in here who won the Chicago race in 2023, raced really well at the road courses in 2024, and now gets to have a full season under his belt. And now that he has the Xfinity experience, it will be interesting to see how he handles that number 88, which is going to be great to see the 88 come back. Alex Bowman last having it before he swapped to the 48 team, and of course before Alex Bowman, Dale Jr. driving that car. This 3-car team at Trackhouse left as Zane Smith as the odd man out. The plan was Zane Smith drives a bit for Spire for a little bit. This is his rookie year, and he has kind of figured it out. He's starting to get better finishes, but with Van Gisbergen throwing a wrench in all that, he is the one getting the boot as Daniel Suarez signed an extension. So Trackhouse's team next year: Daniel Suarez, Ross Chastain, and Shane Van Gisbergen, all forces to be reckoned with, especially on the road courses. Chase Briscoe, I've mentioned it earlier. He, in light of the Martin Truex Jr. retirement from full-time racing, he will be piloting the Joe Gibbs number 19 Toyota come next year. Josh Berry will go to the Wood Brothers number 21. Harrison Burton will be leaving the 21. He's able to get that one win at Daytona this year to put him in the playoffs. His first career win. He will be going full-time with AM Racing in the Xfinity Series. So he's going to take a step back from the Cup Series. He has a win. You don't just happen into wins in the Cup Series. So he has talent there, and he's still young. He's 23 years old. Plenty of time. Let him race with a good team in the Xfinity for a year or two, and maybe when he's ready, he can return to the Cup Series. We had a very strange situation with an in-season trade. I could not remember the last time there was an in-season trade with NASCAR drivers, but Corey LaJoie, obviously a topic of controversy this season, will be heading to Rick Ware Racing for the remainder of 2024, starting at Kansas. Justin Haley, who has impressed in this back of the pack equipment, he is heading to the 7. So that is the car that is the driver who will be paired with Rodney Childers in 2025 when he joins Spire in the 7 car. And it's very exciting to see because Justin Haley has talent. We've seen him perform well with these cars that look like they should only be in the 30s, and he's been able to get some good finishes out of it. So credit to Justin Haley. He is going to go to a good team with a great crew chief, and it is going to be very, very exciting to see what he can do. We have Cole Custer, the Xfinity Series champion of 2023. He's returning full-time to the Cup Series team. The Haas Factory team, number 41. So, of course, this still leaves Ryan Preece without a ride as of recording of this. But it looks like Cole Custer might finally have the proper seasoning he needs to compete in the Cup Series. We've seen him obviously do well in Xfinity, winning the championship, winning a lot of races. It might be the perfect time to call him back up, and that's exactly what Haas is doing. A perfect storm, so to speak, with Stewart leaving, gave a good chance to clean house and bring Custer back up. And as we mentioned earlier, we had Daniel Suarez signing his extension. Along with that, we also had Eric Jones remaining with Legacy for the foreseeable future. And a non-surprising one, Bubba Wallace is sticking with 2311. That should be no surprise. These drivers, As much as I'm not a big fan of where Legacy is at the moment, I think Eric Jones is going to help that team. He has proven that he can win in that 43. He, of course, a Southern 500 winner. Bubba Wallace, he was 23XI's first driver. He, I think, just needs to keep putting things together. Just needs to get more consistency, and he can be in the playoffs as well. He had a statistically, this was his best season in the NASCAR Cup Series. Even though last year he made the playoffs and this year he didn't, he can't account for two guys who were out of the playoffs just racing their way in on wins. Chase Briscoe maybe, but certainly not Harrison Burton at a track like Daytona. But Bubba Wallace, if his team can just show that consistency they show in the second half of the season that they have these last 2 years, if they can do that in the first half, this team will not only be competing for the playoffs, they're going to be competing for wins, and they already have. We've seen last year when they went to Texas, Bubba was in position there, but lost it on a race restart. We had Bubba on a late charge at Bristol when we didn't think it was possible for anybody to challenge the 5. He ultimately didn't get close, but he did finish up third. He's had good finishes. 23XI is the place that is going to let him get the best of his potential and his talents. I expect to see that 23 in victory lane soon enough, but the right move here done by Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin, and everybody at 23XI, getting that in place so Bubba Wallace can continue racing in that number 23 Toyota. And finally, AJ Allmendinger, he went part-time racing this year for Colleague. He is back full-time next year with Colleague. So the road course ringer, I believe 3 career wins, 2 with Colleague Racing, back full-time in the Cup Series. Now, before we wrap up, I would like to remind everybody to please check out Part 1 of our NASCAR Iceberg. Part 2 is in the works as we speak. Make sure to check that out once we're finished here. Be sure to follow on social media. All of those links will be in the description below. Tony will hopefully be back next week, unless he decides to leave again and let me be all alone on this podcast. But thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you for pulling in to the Palmetto Pit Stop. We will catch you next time.